We reserve the right to refuse service. The words echoed across the dining room like a slap. Marcus Carter felt his wife's fingers tighten around his hand. Their anniversary night was over before it even began. But what no one inside Grillwood could imagine was that this single refusal would spark a sudden turn of event and ignite a movement no one saw coming. Tonight wasn't just another dinner. It was the beginning of a story about dignity, ownership, and turning pain into power. Marcus Carter was a postal worker, steady and meticulous. His wife, Tasha, taught third grade at Jefferson Elementary, the same school she'd attended as a child. They weren't wealthy, but they were respected, and both had grown up on stories of grandparents who marched for civil rights and taught them to keep their heads high no matter what. For weeks, they'd saved for this anniversary dinner at Grillwood, the fanciest restaurant in their small Midwestern town. White tablecloths, a classic American menu, and a silent, unspoken rule about who was truly welcome. Marcus called ahead, made a reservation, even bought a new tie. They arrived early, hand in hand, hearts light. But from the moment they walked in, something felt wrong. The waiter couldn't find their reservation. And then, in a voice loud enough for the room to hear, the manager said the line that would burn itself into their memory. We reserve the right to refuse service. No reason. No apology. Just rejection. They didn't yell. They didn't beg. Marcus simply looked at the gold-leaf Grillwood sign and thought, one day. He had no idea that one day was closer than anyone could have imagined. Back in their car, rain drumming on the roof, neither spoke for a long time. Marcus stared at the steering wheel. Tasha wiped a tear she didn't want him to see. They'd been taught all their lives about subtle racism. This wasn't subtle at all. That night, Marcus typed a measured but powerful message on social media. Tasha wrote a letter to the local paper. They didn't expect much, but by morning, the post had been shared hundreds of times. By evening, thousands. Old employees came forward with stories of discrimination. Former customers posted receipts with notes about being discouraged from returning. The local TV station knocked on their door. Grillwood issued a 2-sentence statement calling it a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Protesters lined the sidewalk. Reservations dried up. Within months, the once coveted corner building sat dark and empty. Yet every morning on the way to work, Marcus and Tasha would drive past that boarded-up building, and something inside them began to shift. At first, the darkened building was just a wound, a reminder of public humiliation. But slowly, another thought crept in. What if it didn't have to stay a symbol of exclusion? What if it became something else? Marcus began looking up small business loans on his phone during lunch breaks. Tasha stayed late at school, researching grants for minority entrepreneurs. Friends from church offered to volunteer. A retired chef they knew from a youth group said he'd help with a menu. A local lawyer they'd met at a protest offered pro bono help. They weren't entrepreneurs. They didn't have deep pockets. Banks were skeptical. They were denied twice, but they kept applying. They saved every spare dollar. They held fish fry fundraisers and town hall meetings in the church basement. Neighbors pledged small monthly donations. Slowly, the impossible started to look possible. Jars of cash from bake sales, Marcus speaking at a microphone. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a bank officer slid a manila envelope across the desk. Marcus opened it and felt his heart stop. What was inside the envelope would decide whether their dream lived or died. And it was only the beginning. Marcus's hands trembled as he tore open the envelope. This was it. Months of calls, forms, fundraisers, rejections. On the page inside said a single number enough to buy the building where they'd once been humiliated. Or not. Across the desk, the bank officer waited. Outside, rain hammered the window like a ticking clock. Tasha squeezed Marcus's arm. Neither of them breathed. The answer was there, printed in black ink, but could they trust it? It wasn't a full loan, not even close. But it was enough to combine with every pledge, every fish-fried dollar, every church basement fundraiser to make an offer on the building. Marcus looked up at Tasha. She was already nodding. They weren't just buying walls. They were buying back a story that had been stolen from them. Word spread quickly. The Carters are buying grill wood, neighbors whispered. Some cheered. Others muttered that they were in over their heads. Even a few old customers warned, that building's cursed. Still, Marcus and Tasha pressed on. Within weeks, their offer was accepted. The closing date was set. Yet as the ink dried, an anonymous envelope arrived in their mailbox, no return address. Just 2 words typed on a scrap of paper. Don't bother. Was it a threat, a warning, or something worse? The day they got the keys, Marcus and Tasha walked through the darkened grillwood alone. Chairs still stacked on tables. Menus curling at the edges. The smell of stale grease. Here at the host stand, Tasha had been told they weren't welcome. Now she ran her fingers across the same counter and whispered, "Ours." They took nothing for granted. Every invoice, every permit, every city inspection felt like a small battle. More than once, inspectors delayed approvals. Banks questioned their budgets. A neighbor filed a noise complaint before renovations even began. But for every setback, a new ally appeared. A retired carpenter from church who volunteered weekends. A college student who offered to design a logo for free. A group of teenagers who scraped paint off the walls until their fingers blistered. By midsummer, the restaurant was unrecognizable. Walls once lined with expensive paintings were painted bright and hung with student art. The bar was torn out to make room for a tutoring space. The kitchen became a training ground for local youth. Yet just as a dream was taking shape, an unexpected visitor arrived at their door, carrying a folder of old grillwood documents that could either doom or turbocharge a project. He was an older man, nervous at first, clutching a battered briefcase. "I used to manage this place," he said. "I quit after what happened to you too. I kept records. Things the owners wouldn't want public." Inside the folder, invoices, staff memos, even internal emails showing discriminatory practices. Proof. They could have gone public. Burned Grillwood's legacy down for good. But Tasha had another idea. Use the information quietly to secure grants for minority-owned business rehabilitation. Show funders exactly what they were transforming. It worked. Within weeks, 2 national nonprofits pledged support. Donations doubled. The city fast-tracked their final permits. The project that had seemed impossible was suddenly within reach. But success brings attention, and not all of it welcome. Late one night, Marcus found a brick on their new doorstep with a note. "Stay in your lane." Despite the threats, the Carter House Community Hub opened on schedule. The smell of fresh bread replaced the stench of exclusion. Children laughed in the tutoring corner. Local farmers delivered produce. Former Grillwood staff, those who quit in protest, returned to work at better wages. The first night, Tasha stood behind the counter watching neighbors file in, eyes shining. She thought of her grandparents, of the marches, of being told at age 10 she'd have to be twice as good. Now she was building a space where kids wouldn't have to hear that. Reporters called it a model for inclusive revitalization. City officials who'd once ignored them now asked Marcus and Tasha to sit on advisory boards. Even the same bank that had denied their first loan opened an account at Carter House to show support. But as the crowds grew, so did the pressure. Could the Carter House survive the next test one that would strike at the heart of their mission? 3 months after opening, an offer arrived. A national chain wanted to buy the building outright at double what Marcus and Tasha had paid. Friends urged them to take the money and run. Others warned that saying no could bring powerful enemies. Late one night, Marcus sat alone at one of the cafe tables, staring at the letter. Tasha walked in, holding a stack of unpaid invoices. Outside, a group of teens practiced spoken word poetry for the weekend showcase. Inside, a decision loomed that could define everything they'd built. They had turned humiliation into hope. But could they protect it? And at what cost? The letter on the cafe table promised a fortune. Double what they'd paid. Security for life. All they had to do was hand over the keys to the building they'd fought so hard to reclaim. Marcus and Tasha knew this wasn't just about money. This was about the soul of what they'd built. Say yes, and they could walk away rich. Say no, and they'd risk everything, including making some powerful enemies. What would you do? For days, they barely slept. Friends pulled them in both directions. Their accountant warned of rising costs. Their pastor reminded them of their calling. The couple sat at their kitchen table, bills spread like a battlefield, the offer letter in the middle. They thought about the teenagers who'd found their first jobs at Carter House, the single moms who used cafe Wi-Fi to finish college degrees, the artists whose work now covered the walls. Selling would mean an end to all of it. Then, just when they were leaning toward no, a legal notice arrived that threatened to close them down anyway. A zoning complaint, filed anonymously, claimed Carter House was violating occupancy limits. If upheld, the hub could be shuttered within weeks. It was clear now. Someone wanted them out, whether by buyout or by bureaucratic chokehold. Marcus felt the old humiliation creeping back, but this time he wasn't powerless. They launched a public campaign, showing exactly what Carter House had done for the community. Local kids performed poetry on the courthouse steps. Former Grill Woods staff testified. The city council chambers overflowed. The vote came down to a single council member, whose decision no one could predict. On a rainy Thursday night, Marcus and Tasha stood in the back of the council room, holding hands. The roll call began. One by one, the votes came in. All eyes turned to the last council member. He cleared his throat, looked directly at Marcus, and spoke. The permit was renewed. Carter House would stay open. Cheers erupted. Neighbors hugged. But Marcus and Tasha just looked at each other, exhausted and relieved. They hadn't just won a vote. They'd claimed a future. But what about the offer? Would they still say no? That night, back at the empty cafe, they laid the offer letter on the counter and tore it in half. The decision was made. Carter House will remain a community space, no matter how tempting the money. Instead of cashing out, they doubled down, expanding the job training program, adding mental health counseling, opening a microloan fund for neighborhood entrepreneurs. The story spread nationwide. TV crews came. A documentary crew called. Donations poured in. What had begun as an act of discrimination had become a model of community self-determination. But Marcus and Tasha didn't want to be the story's ending. They wanted to be its beginning. 2 years later, the Carter House stage is filled every weekend. Open mics, free concerts, business workshops. On the wall near the entrance hangs a plaque. This building once turned people away. Now it welcomes everyone. Marcus and Tasha proved that ownership isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about rewriting history and reclaiming dignity. They showed a town and anyone watching that justice can be won not only in courtrooms, but at closing tables and community meetings. How many other buildings, streets, whole neighborhoods could transform if the people once excluded had the chance to lead? How many wounds could become wellsprings? That's why we tell these stories here, because everyone is a blueprint for change. If this story moved you, subscribe to Black Struggle Chronicles. We're uncovering more untold journeys like Marcus and Tasha's stories of pain turned into power, exclusion turned into ownership. Don't miss the next one.